Alton of Liverpool.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
My Lords, in November 2021, the UNHCR estimated that the number of people forcibly displaced globally exceeded 84 million by mid-2021. Since then, another 11 million people have been displaced within Ukraine or abroad as refugees. The UK has led the way in forging innovative solutions to refugee crises and championing a longer-term international approach to displacement. Ultimately, political efforts to build and sustain peace are the key to resolving displacement.
In thanking the Noble Lord for that reply, does he recall the crossbench debate in January of this year to which he answered, and the calls that were made for urgent consideration to be given to the root causes and push factors that have led to this more than 80 million people that he's just identified as being displaced, 50 million of whom are displaced because of violence or conflict everywhere from Ukraine to Afghanistan to Burma and Syria, and some of whom spend their entire lives in camps. My Lords, what consideration have we given to following up the calls made in that debate for the United Kingdom to convene a COP26-style summit to identify and support durable solutions that enable refugees and displaced people to rebuild their lives and to live in safety and dignity rather than seeking perilous journeys or to fester for years in squalid conditions where they can become fodder for traffickers and for insurgencies?
Noble Lord's absolutely right, and of course I do very much remember the debate and the message that was conveyed by a number of Noble Lords in that debate. The Noble Lord mentioned COP26, and COP26, while ostensibly focused on climate change, is every bit as relevant to this debate we're having today as it is relevant to climate change. We are in a world that is increasingly unstable. The majority of refugees are displaced as a consequence of violence, but we know that environmental factors are becoming an increasing factor. So the solution isn't to focus purely on the issue of refugees. The solution is to do, using every tool at our disposal, everything we can to ensure the world addresses those gigantic challenges that I know the Noble Lord is as concerned about as I am.
My Lords, what estimate has been made?
Climate change. Is he aware that the expansion of the Sahara was partly what fueled the conflict in Darfur? As people were displaced from that area. And so that was an early warning of the global instability likely to follow climate change. Yet we hear that the funding on climate change in his department is about to be decimated. Does that make sense?
The commitment that we've made as a government to not just maintain levels of funding for climate change, but in fact to double our international climate finance to 11.6 billion remains intact. So I'm not sure where those rumours are coming from. More so, as part of that commitment to spend 11.6 billion on climate change, we're also committed to spending around 3 billion of that on nature-based solutions to climate change, specifically so that we can tackle the kinds of issues that the Noble Baroness has just mentioned.
My Lords, what estimate has been made of the number of these refugees who are fleeing or have fled religious persecution? It must be a very considerable figure.
My Lords, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, but I would imagine that the Noble Lord is right and that it is a very significant figure. But with his permission, I will convey his question to the Home Office and get back to him.
My Lords, does the
agree that
this side.
Would the Noble Lord the Minister agree that the real challenge lies not in identifying the causes of migration, which include the poverty, which include repressive regimes, which include, conflict, and also the climate change, but rather in forging an international consensus to tackle those root causes? What initiatives does the Minister have in mind?
Well, the Noble Lord is right that the solution is a global one, but that is precisely why the UK is putting so much effort, not only through the duration of our presidency of COP, which of course didn't end in Glasgow, it ends when we hand the baton to Egypt at the end of this year, but also the CBD Nature COP, which is being hosted by China in Kunming. I don't think there's any country in the world, and I would even include the host country, putting more effort into seeking the highest possible ambition. In addition to that, a great great friend of the United Kingdom, Andrea Meza, former Environment Minister of Costa Rica, is now running things in the UNCCD, the desertification COP, and we'll be working extremely closely with her to ensure there too we get the highest possible ambition.
My Lords, may I ask the Noble Lord the Minister if he's aware of the growth of Islamist jihadism in many areas in Nigeria, which has caused massive displacement? Recently I visited Middlebelt, where in that region alone there are an estimated 3 million displaced people, and we personally witnessed their suffering and destitution. May I therefore ask the Noble Lord if he acknowledges that if there is not a systematic, effective international strategy, led by Global Britain, to tackle the root causes, you will see an exponential growth in human suffering caused by mass displacement.
Noble Baroness is absolutely right, and it feeds very much into the question by my noble friend behind me, Lord Cormac. And I agree, of course, that the UK has an enormously important role to play, and I think we've demonstrated, particularly over the last year, our ability to convene and to provide that leadership, not least through our stewardship of the COP conference. But yes, I agree, and I know the government would agree too.
My Lords, this month, the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees warned that the government's plan to send asylum seekers to Rwanda violates international law. Could I ask the Noble Lord the Minister, what impact does he think this will have on the forthcoming CHOGM in Rwanda? Does he not agree this unworkable, unethical and extortionate policy will undermine our influence on fellow Commonwealth countries to comply with international law?
My Lords, I don't recognise that. The approach that we're taking in relation to Rwanda is one which our government is convinced passes all the legal tests that it might be subjected to. But may I make the point that and I understand where the Noble Lord is coming from, but there's a myth, I would suggest, that doing nothing is the kind option, that doing nothing absolutely guarantees a continuation of the kind of suffering that this deal is designed to ameliorate.
My Lords.
My Lords.
My Lords.
Thank you, my Lords. The UN estimates, as we've already heard the Noble Lord the Minister say, that more than 11 million Ukrainians have been displaced from their homes since the 24th of February. More than 5 million have now fled the country, and approximately 2/3 of the country's children are now displaced. And it does us well to remember that, of course, these are not just numbers. Each of these represents one human life. The outpouring of concern from the British public and willingness to host refugees in their homes has been a powerful statement of love amidst this extraordinary tragedy. Indeed, many across the Diocese of Chelmsford, which I serve, and across the country have gone to great lengths to welcome refugees with open arms. So I wonder whether the Minister could please expand on what is being done to address concerns raised about delays and complications in processing asylum applications through the Homes for Ukraine scheme.
May I start by echoing very strongly the comments of the Noble Lord the Prelate in terms of the generosity of the British public. Look, we are forging ahead as a government, doing everything we can to ensure that our doors are open and the country is welcoming to those people fleeing violence in Ukraine as a consequence of the Russian invasion. We have 2 bespoke humanitarian routes for people in Ukraine, and they've been announced. They respond directly to the needs and requests of the Ukrainian government. There is no limit on the numbers of people who can come here. As of April 21st, more than 71,000 visas have been issued under both those schemes. The family route's been extended, and it's difficult to know the numbers because no one knows the numbers, but an estimated 100,000 Ukrainians may join their family members in the UK. And while there have been delays, and there's no point pretending there haven't been delays, it is very much the view of the Home Office and the Foreign Office that the systems are now in place to ensure a smooth functioning of the approach that we set out.
My Lords, how could...
Does the Noble Lord the Minister agree that the wonderful response of the British public to the Ukraine crisis illustrates their willingness to help when they're sure that those concerned are genuine? And secondly, in the wider context of a review that he's mentioned, will they include another look at the Refugee Convention,
now many years old and facing entirely different circumstances.
Agree again very strongly with the Noble Lord, and I think there is a recognition clearly a recognition of the very acute needs of those people needing to flee Ukraine for obvious reasons, likewise Afghanistan. But there's also a recognition that underlying the movement of people en masse around the world very often is a criminal network of almost indescribable brutality and ruthlessness, and that's exactly what this government is seeking to undermine. Because until we remove those incentives, those organisations will continue to grow from strength to strength. And on a point about the convention, I will convey that message to the Home Office.
Second oral question, Lord Bell.